this workshop. So just a heads up, I just started the recording. We're hoping to be able to use this to help other students as well who may not have been able to make it tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are just joining, please make sure you fill out this form. All right, and welcome to the How to Write a Research Resume workshop. If you haven't seen me around yet, my name is Rebecca Ryan, she, her pronouns. I am the program director for the University Career Center, embedded in computer, mathematical, and natural sciences. So for those of you who are in CM&S, I'm somebody who plans a lot of programs that you might be getting emails about. If you're not a CM&S student and you're part of another college, you may also have a program director. For those of you who are part of the School of Public Health, we actually have your new program director on the video as well today, Kelly Kessler. Very excited to have her joining us tonight. But you can kind of keep track of who your program director is through the Careers for Terps website, careers.umd.edu/careers for Terps. And if you go in and select like who your advisors are that you can meet with for an appointment, your PD will probably pop up as an available person. So just a little bit about me. I have worked with students who are applying to research graduate programs, worked with students pursuing healthcare, tech careers, so a lot of different industries across the board within CM&S. But the workshop that we're doing today is specifically looking at ways to highlight your research experience. And those experiences could be either class-related experiences, if you don't have any formal research experience yet, but you're looking to kind of like feature some of the different things you've done in your coursework so far so you can get a position. But it also could be used as you're thinking about potentially pursuing more involved internship experiences and things like that over the summer, and then even as you may consider graduate school as a step. So some things we're going to go over today, we will talk about just the importance of a resume in general, in terms of the purpose, and then how to personalize it and why we personalize it. We'll talk about some different general requirements, including formatting, organization, and writing structure. And then we'll also talk about some other resume resources coming up here as well. So what is the purpose of a resume? This is not a trick question, but I do think it's important to get a little bit of input from the crowd here because we've all shown up at this workshop for a reason, right? An hour is not a short amount of time when you're a college student. And so I'm curious, you all have decided to come here and spend your time with me talking about research resumes. So in your mind, what do you think the purpose is of a research resume? Feel free to either raise your hand or share in the chat some ideas you have. So when we think of a research resume, what is the purpose? Feel free to type in the chat and answer that. Great. So one student has said to showcase your skills and past experiences. Definitely. When we think about the reader, who's typically looking at it? Any ideas? Who would you send this to? The research lab director. Yeah. Anybody else? Other ideas? So you might also end up sending it to like a graduate student who's assisting in the lab. It could be like a government related research position. So you might be working with like an HR person or government person. There's a lot of different folks across the board who may look at this, but they're all research minded, right? So they're thinking about how much you fit with a research role. And so I want you to think about what message you want to send. When we think about research resumes and we're considering why we're doing them, Ideally, we're able to showcase our interest in the research topic that we might be applying to work within. And we're also trying to highlight our skills and making sure that those skills are things that would make us an asset to a lab. A lot of the research that you may be applying to do, especially when it comes to, being an underclassman, is most likely going to be research that involves working with a team. And so, you always want to be thinking about, how am I showcasing my ability to work with other people, my technical skills, my interest in the topic, and my overall understanding of the requirements of this lab. Ideally, this resume will get you in the door to hopefully have a more official interview, or maybe even do a little bit of work with the lab, and see if you might be a good fit. So there is value in actually customizing your resume. I think sometimes when we do a resume, we think, okay, it just needs to be this perfect thing. Once I get it perfect, I'm never going to change it. But actually, here in the Career Center, we have a slightly different perspective on that. And in fact, about 98% of Fortune 500 companies use a applicant tracking system, known as ATS, to help identify applicants who are either qualified or unqualified for a position. Now, I've spoken with a variety of different officials in government labs who have also said that when you apply through an organization website, a lot of times they're also using ATS to filter through applicants. And so it is important that you're aware of what the required skills are for the research role you're applying to, and how you might be able to even modify slight, phrases or terms on your resume so that you're as close of a match to the language used in the posting as possible. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what sort of language is appropriate on a resume in the later slides. But I want to really encourage you, just like plant that seed right now, that once you do this initial resume, it may change over time, and it should change with each program that you're pursuing. Even if you're applying to a smaller lab or a smaller organization that is engaging in research, it's really important that you're still personalizing your resume. Well, a software may not be used by every single organization. They are still going to be looking through your resume and ideally very quickly being able to determine that you're a good match for their program. And so you don't want an employer or a research lead kind of scratching their head thinking, where does this person fit in the lab? Do they really have any interest in the topic that I'm focusing on, right? We want it to be really obvious and just shine through right away. And so I think that's something to really keep in mind, right? Familiarize yourself with the lab's work. If there's a posting, make sure that you're trying to match the language in the posting, all of those things to make sure you're really specific. So some things to keep in mind, and I like to start with this because I think it's important that we have some ground rules here. So as you're working on writing your resume, just kind of set your font at a minimum of 10 points when you're writing this. Make sure that your margins are between 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Try your best to keep it to 1 page. We can talk about some exceptions, especially later on if you have questions about that. And then consider what sort of information you're putting on your resume. For example, if you're just coming into college, maybe you're a freshman this year and you're really excited to get your first role in a lab on campus, you probably still have some high school experiences on there, right? Because you just got to Maryland, you need a little bit of time to get engaged. But if you're a senior and you still have like your soccer team on your resume, unless you're applying to a research position that involves an understanding of sports, it might be time to remove that from your resume so that you have space to feature more of the recent experiences that are relevant to that research. And so I just want to plant that seed. Keep a critical eye. I think there are certainly exceptions to this. Sometimes we'll work with students who, when they were in high school, they did do some research. Maybe they had an internship with NIH or did some sort of high school research program. Those things you could keep on, but just be conscious of why you're keeping it on, right? Are you keeping it on because you just kind of don't have the heart to remove it, or are you keeping it on because it's something that's really relevant and interesting to the position that you're pursuing? And then make sure that you're using a clean and consistent format. Sometimes I'll see folks who have really creative resumes and they have like different columns and colors and graphics. But unless you're applying for a position that involves like a communication field or something in the arts, it may not be appropriate to have colors, different columns on there. A lot of times, especially with research resumes that are in the STEM field, the employers are looking for something that's very straightforward, right? So they want to be able to look through everything very quickly. And so a basic, clean format is actually ideal. You don't want somebody trying to figure out where you go to school or what your graduation year is or what skills you possess. We want it to be very quickly readable. And then finally, avoid excessive white space. So try to fill in your resume as best you can. We're going to go over some ideas on things that you can add to a resume today. But I think that it's really important to just be conscious of what you're keeping on, what you're considering taking off, those sorts of things. Does anybody have any questions about the basic formatting of a resume before we kind of move into the nuts and bolts of a research resume? Okay, I'm gonna. Aha, good question. Okay, so someone asked in the chat, does one page mean one sheet front and back or just the front page? So when I say one page, I do mean just one front page. However, if you're at a point where you have a ton of experience and you really can't fit it onto just one page, that's a really good time to take a step back, maybe even set up an appointment with a career advisor in the University Career Center to see what you might be able to do to make the most of your content that you have. If your experience is going beyond one page, ideally it's because you're an upperclassman who's had a lot of experience. And even then, we may consider how we organize your experiences so that the most important stuff is still on that first page. So things like your skills or really relevant research experiences, maybe even an objective, those sorts of things may go on the front at the top, no matter what, right? So we want to make sure that we're really featuring the things that are most important. Rarely do I see a resume for undergrad that needs to go beyond a page, but there's a lot that we can get creative with in terms of your formatting. Again, 10-point font, half-inch margins to try to make the most of the space that you have. That was a really good question. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, if any questions pop up as I'm speaking, feel free to ask. Definitely happy to answer as we move through the next few slides. So this is actually a sample resume that we have. And what you'll see is that below this, there's, and I'll send you a link to this afterward for those of you who haven't completed attendance yet. I will be sending out these slides afterward using your contact information from the form. So one thing that's really important to note on this resume is that, again, it's very clean, right? It's very organized. It starts out with their name, their contact information at the top, and kind of works its way down. And we're going to go through some of these different points, but I want to just give you a second to really look at this resume, take it in, and then we're going to break it down piece by piece. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is the contact information. It's really important that you put your contact information on a resume. I might sound really basic in saying this, but I think it should be said. You want to make sure that you're including your location. So either having a permanent city and state that you are from. So maybe you're from New Jersey, you might put your hometown and state there, or, you might want to put College Park, Maryland, if you're applying for local things, right? You also want to make sure that you're including your email and your phone number. Lately, I've started to see some folks who remove their phone number. I know a lot of us don't love getting phone calls and voicemails anymore. We're very much a text heavy society right now, but it is important that you have your phone number. Sometimes people like to call you, so it's important that you have that on there and that you have a professional voicemail that goes along with that, right? So making sure that you don't have like a silly song or something playing, that it just goes right to your name so people can contact you. And you'll see that the biggest thing at the top of the page is actually the person's name. So I always recommend that. Make your name a little bit bigger, make sure it pops, and then have that contact info at the top. Something else that I've seen people add more recently is a link to their LinkedIn profile. So that's something that you can add for those of you who have a LinkedIn, or even if you don't, if you're thinking about adding it. Some, especially I would say like outside of like basic higher ed departments, like a lot of organizations are very active on LinkedIn. In particular, I've worked with a lot of government researchers who are very active on LinkedIn. Actually, they do use it. So make sure that if you have a LinkedIn, you've got it on there. People might connect with you. It's a really good way for people to be able to identify who they might know that you also know, right? So what connections do you have in common? Oh, I see you know this faculty member who I also took a class with when I was at Maryland, right? Those sorts of things are really cool for employers to see. So make sure that you're adding a LinkedIn if you have it. And then the next thing is to consider what an objective might be for your resume. So this should really be personalized to the position you're applying for and relate to the research. An example here is the objective says position in bioinformatics using knowledge of genetics, lab skills, programming skills, and interpersonal skills. So this person actually wanted to highlight the field they're interested in, so bioinformatics, but they are especially passionate about genetics and want to be able to use a variety of different skills that they possess. And this is a really good little preview. I recommend that your objective doesn't go beyond 2 lines. If it starts to get that long, that's something that you may want to consider revising and pulling some of that content into a separate cover letter. So we want the objective just to be really clean, concise, and allow the researcher, the lab director, to move forward. Any questions about that? Okay. So the next thing I really want to focus on is your education. It's really important that you're formatting this appropriately, especially when you're applying for positions in academia, right? So if you're looking to work with a professor, make sure that you're not like writing the wrong degree or misnaming your major. We want to make sure that this is all really clear. So you'll see on the left side, we have Bachelor of Science, okay? It's not bachelor's, don't put BS, don't put bio major, Bachelor of Science, Biological Sciences. So you'll want to put whatever your major actually is. And then below that, we have the minor, right? So this is where the person maybe puts like minor in computer science. I've also seen people put like if they're part of a special honors college, they may put that information there. So anything that's really specific to your connection to University of Maryland or the degree that you're earning, you would be able to put in this section. You also see that they did put University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland. So again, they're highlighting the location of where they're going to school. And then the most important part is when you're graduating, right? So people care what year you are in school, when you're leaving Maryland. So putting expected and then the month and year that you expect to get your degree is really important. Sometimes I'll see folks put like a date range. You really don't need to do that. It's totally fine to just put the year that you plan to graduate. Another thing that's not on this specific resume, but I know is common to a lot of our students, is having an additional degree before they come to Maryland. So maybe you did an associate's degree at a local community college before you got here, or maybe you didn't actually get the degree, maybe you just took a few courses and then transferred over. If that's the case, make sure that you also put the local college that you went to before you went to Maryland. You would just put that below University of Maryland. So anytime you're listing things on a resume, you want to do it in reverse chronological order. So you're currently a Maryland student, that goes at the top of education. And then below that, if you had an additional degree that or additional coursework, you might put that there as well. If you are just coming into college and you just graduated from high school this past spring, congratulations, welcome to College Park. You're absolutely fine to add your high school information at this point as well. So feel free to keep that on there if you've had it on there already. You will see that I have something here about GPA. So I typically recommend only including your GPA if it's above a 3.0, unless of course there is some sort of requirement that you list your GPA for the application. So if there's a GPA requirement for that position, you would definitely want to make sure your GPA is somewhere on your resume. I usually find a lot of students keep it off when they're doing research, unless like if their GPA is a little bit lower, they'll keep it off. And then if they're feeling like, you know what, my grades are where I want them to be right now, then they might have it on there. Any questions about the education section? Okay. So I want to move on to this next section, which is technical skills. And this is a really important part as well. So you want to make sure that you're listing your technical skills underneath your education. A lot of times with research, technical skills are really, really important. So faculty want to know, for example, faculty want to know what you know how to do. These might be skills that you've developed through your coursework. So maybe you took some bio courses and you've developed some lab skills through that. Maybe you took some AP courses when you were in high school. Perhaps you have some tech related skills and programming language knowledge that you want to share. Whatever that might be, make sure that you're really organizing your skills here. So you'll see Allen Science put their lab skills first because they're interested in, a genetics lab, but they also possess programming skills. And so they wanted to list those on there as well. They also categorize their skills. So you see advanced C, Java, C++, HTML, intermediate SQL. So if there's programming languages that maybe you're just getting started with, you're not super confident in yet, it's okay to put beginner Python. Okay, you don't want to lie about your skills here. It's going to come out at some point if you need to use that skill. So just be honest with where you're at with this skill, and be aware if you're early on in the research process, a lot of times faculty don't expect you to be an expert, right? They just want you to have a passion for learning more and some basic foundational skills. Any questions about the skills section? If you're adding lab experience under the technical skills, you need to include the school you took the courses in. That's a good question. So I would actually recommend that if you took any courses where you developed lab skills, you could consider putting that in the education section of your resume and then have the actual skills that you learned in the technical skills section. So let me give you an example of that. Perhaps you took a microbiology course at a community college. You would put under that college like relevant coursework, and you would list the names of the courses, not the course code, just the full name. So microbiology. Then in the skills section under lab skills, you would list the specific skills that you developed through that lab. But you wouldn't need to to specify if you got that skill from a specific course, right? You would just list your courses in education under relevant coursework, just below like the college that you attended. And then you could actually highlight those skills a little bit more in the technical skills section. Any follow-up questions on that? That was a really good question. It's not uncommon for us to see students list some of their relevant coursework, especially if they're really interested in a specific research topic and they've taken classes in that area. All right, so we're going to move on to this, this next one. So the next thing that I really want to highlight for you, and sorry that this part isn't erasing, but is thinking about the actual bullet points that you're including and the experiences that you have. So I always recommend including research experience as its own category, and in particular, then including the name and the position that you have in the lab. So I'm going to just go back for a second so you can see the basics of this resume again. So you'll see there's a research experience section. Then we have the title, right? So what was your role in the lab? Intern, research assistant, programming assistant, whatever it might be that you've done in this lab, list your title there. And then list the name of the lab and where that lab was located. So for example, Allen Science was an intern, molecular genetics lab at University of Maryland College Park, and also includes the state, right? Because not all of this person's research experience has been in the state of Maryland. Then you'll see on the right side, and this is very common, the dates are again right aligned, and you get the time frame of when you were actually in that experience. That's really important because you want to give folks a sense of how long you had that experience. If this was a project that you did, maybe you did like an independent research project or something, you would still list the date range. So maybe when you were in high school, if you did like a, I don't know, a senior year research project, you would list the months that you actually worked on that project. And then you would maybe list like independent project for, and then the name of the course, and then like where you actually engaged in that research on the following line. Then we get to the bullet points. So this is where you're really going to want to try to highlight your technical skills as well as your soft skills. So you'll see the first bullet point under the molecular genetics lab is really highlighting a technical skill that this person has. Then we see what are some of the things that they actually did, right? So they carried out PCR-based cloning of the human genome. They identified plant transformation with reporter gene constructs, and so on and so on. It's very common that the first bullet point that you have when you're highlighting a research experience is a summary of the research that you are actually supporting. Then from there, you might list the specific things that you did. And then the final bullet point, if you had any sort of accomplishment, maybe you presented a poster, or you were part of a science fair, or you had a publication that came from this experience, you typically would put that in the last bullet point for your experience. Are there any questions about how this is set up? Okay. Something else that I just want to point out here is that all of these bullet points start with a powerful verb. So we always want to make sure that our bullet points do start with a verb, right? I always like to imagine the invisible I. So like I, invisible, it's not on there, but I performed phenotypic screen for development and response mutants in C. elegans and so on, right? I, invisible, carried out PCR-based cloning of the human genome. So that's a good way when you're just going through your resume, doing a final check, you kind of add that in there. Good. Okay, so I got a question. Should the verbs always be in past tense? Just going to share the signing because I think we just got another student who arrived. No, your verb should not always be in past tense. Your verbs are in past tense if the project has been completed or if your time with that position has ended. So you'll see, for example, like I'm imagining that Alan Science, who was an intern at the molecular genetics lab, that December was like December 2021, right? So it was in the past. However, if Alan Science had September 2022 to present instead of an end date, then their verbs would most likely be in present tense. Now, what if you've maybe been at a lab for a while and you have some things that you've accomplished, but you're still working there? That's where I usually recommend that you put your bullet points of what you're currently doing in present tense, but then maybe you have like an italicized bullet at the end that says key accomplishments include, and then you could list what you already accomplished with some past tense framing. Any other questions? Okay. So I want y'all to give me a reaction if you have any non-research experience right now. Like, does anybody have just like a part-time job or has had a part-time job in the past? Give me a reaction here if you've had one. Something on your resume that's not totally maybe research related that you've done. Maybe you worked as a server or a busboy, worked in a store, anything like that. Okay, great. So that's really normal. And I want to emphasize that those things are also great to put on a resume like this, but it's also important that we think about how we structure them. So I think that a lot of those experiences, for example, let's take retail as an example, all right? If you had a retail experience, there's a lot that goes into that, right? Like you have to be able to follow certain procedures. There's probably like maybe you're responsible for managing inventory and making sure that you're balancing like the books at the end of the night, whatever it might be. You have a lot of skills that you've developed through that process. And so what I usually recommend is that students may have like a technical skills section, a research skills or a research experience section. And then beyond that, they might put something like other relevant experience. And that's where they could highlight additional things that they've done. If you have a position like server, be honest and write that you were a server. You don't need to like jazz up the title of what you were doing or anything. It's totally fine to put that. And as you do that, think about what soft skills you might be able to highlight that, again, work toward what the goal of the lab would be. So if you know you're going to be working as a team on this research project, maybe highlight some of your teamwork skills. If you know that this research is going to involve working with human subjects and explaining procedures to them, think about how you did that in your server position and talked about like the different specials every day, right? Whatever it might be, try to consider what you might be able to highlight from that role that fits with the thing that you're pursuing now. Any questions? Okay, great. If any pop up, feel free to post them in the chat. So I want to focus on something else here related to resumes, which is really thinking about the scope of your work. I know we gave an example of a non-research position already, right? Like doing something in retail or being a server. Here's another example of one, which would be like working as an RA. And in particular, so for those of you who are living on campus right now, hopefully you've met your RA already. For those of you who've been on campus for a while, I hope you liked your RA if you had one, or maybe you're even working as one now. But look at the difference in the way these things are described. We see in the first set, pretty simple language, right? Like responsible for residence in hall, plan programs for residents, advised hall council. Very, very basic to the point things. However, it doesn't really give me a sense of why this is impressive, right? Like, why does it matter that you were responsible for residents in the hall? Were there 3 residents? Were there 50 residents? That makes a difference, right? When you're responsible for a group of people, to know how many people you were responsible for. And What does it mean to be responsible for someone? What sorts of things were you responsible for supporting them with? So we see in the second example, this person has provided us a scale, right? So 60 residents and what topics they were responsible for helping them with. Instead of planning programs, which could be one a semester, one a year, 30 a year, right? We really don't know why or if that's impressive. But now we see, okay, in the second part, planned 8 educational programs each semester. That's a lot, right? And then what sort of topics this person had to focus on. Again, this person's really highlighting their soft skills, like thinking about a topic such as conflict resolution, super important in a teamwork setting, right? So we start to see how adding a little bit of additional detail and even thinking about the scope of work. So how many, how much, why is that important? What did you accomplish? Those sorts of things really help, even when you're describing a job that's not related to research, to highlight some of the different strengths that you might possess, either technical or more hard skills or some of those soft skills. So I really want to highlight as we kind of move forward, thinking about when you might use this. We actually have some fairs coming up that I think might be of interest to all of you. The University Career Center and President's Promise is hosting a fall career and internship fair September 23rd through the 30th. So our first day of the fair is virtual. It's Friday, September 23rd, and you can sign up for it through Careers for Terps. And then we move to an in-person model for 3 days from the 28th through the 30th. Now, why am I telling you this? The 28th and the 29th are both dates that are STEM and engineering focused. So if you're thinking about research, especially in the STEM field, STEM heavy activities, this is a really good opportunity for you to be able to connect with employers and put together that resume so that you can share it with employers who might be interested in hiring you. You can register for this through Careers for Terps. So the same way that you registered for this workshop today is how you can register for the fair. So you'll just go to Careers for Terps, click on events, and then you can see our fall career and internship fair. Another thing you can see is our upcoming event, Pizza and Prepare for the Fair. So we have a lot of different events coming up. And I wanted to make sure I just kind of highlighted them here as we wrap up this workshop. 2 that I think would be really helpful for you to be aware of coming up are the how to prepare for the virtual and in-person career and internship fairs, which is happening Wednesday, September 21st at lunchtime. So come join us for lunch on Zoom and you can learn more about that. And then we also have Pizza and Prepare for the Fair. So have some pizza, join employers later on that following week and prepare for the fair there as well. You can even bring resumes, those sorts of things if you want. So as we wrap up, does anybody have any final questions about research resumes? We have a little bit of time and I'm actually going to go ahead and stop the recording just so that we can have a conversation if you all want to be able to